Leonard, Percival, Howell, and his articulation of Rastafari as an African framework. So his presentation will be between 45 minutes. Please, let's
1212 Radio Culture. Yes, indeed. You're welcome to the much-awaited program. This is the much-awaited presentation by Dr. Kwadwo Oppong Wadie, Weero I, Rastafari, on the topic. I'll get a topic for you in one quick moment. I want to be precise about this. But thank you very much for joining us on Radio Culture. We are live right now. Dr. Kwadwo Oppong Wadie will be speaking in a few minutes, and it looks like he's taking the mic now. So we are going to go straight to Dr. Kwadwo Oppong Wadie on this lecture for today by courtesy the Rastafari Council, Ghana. Full joy.
All right. So I give thanks for this day. I give thanks for good vibe. I want to give thanks to the president of the Rastafari Council of Ghana, Bosco. I also want to give thanks to Rasco Fiasante, who has, been working behind the scenes to make sure that, these kind of events come on for all of us, our benefit and for our learning. I want to give thanks to Ras 7 Fireside, who invited me to, be on this platform. I want to give thanks to Ras Gamali, joining in from Bristol, England. Also, Ras Percival, who is broadcasting this event over his radio network. And I want to give thanks to all my family members who tuned in. And most importantly, I want to give thanks to everybody who is tuned in. We're going to get straight into, as Ras Kofi Asante said, the title of this presentation is Leonard Percival Howell and the articulation of Rastafari as an African framework. So in order for us to really dig into, we will have to cover some basics. Now, I want to say that when I use the word African in this presentation, it is not limited to people who are born only in the continent of Africa. I'm referring to all the children of Africa worldwide. So if you hear me use the word African, that is in a broad sense. Now, I also want to ask politely if we can mute our background, or everybody just mute their thing so that everybody can be able to hear clearly and we have a successful event. Leonard Percival Howell, Gonguru Marai, also known as Dan Gonguru Marai. Give thanks. Also, the President General of the Ethiopian Salvation Society, and also the founder and president of the King of Kings Mission. Leonard Percival Howell is also. Now, the question is Leonard Percival Howell the first Rasta or not? We are going to delve into that. And my answer for that is both yes and no. So we're going to look into that. But before we do that, I want to start with a quotation from The Promised King by Leonard Howell. And I quote, "Upon His Majesty Rastafari's head are many diadems, and on his garment a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Oh, come, let us adore him, for he is King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the conquering Lion of Judah, the elect of God and the light of the world." Leonard Howell, The Promised King. Now, The Promised King is a very critical book which shaped the early formation of Rastafari thinking and also practices. I also want to advance two very important quotations that I personally like that, were brought forward by Leonard Howell. And the first is, "Might cannot fight right." And then the second is, "Forward to the King of Kings." So you may be asking a question, who at all is Leonard Howell? And we're going to address that question. But before we do that, let me just say that he was born in Jamaica in 1898. Now, for the purpose of this presentation, there are two things that I want to really address. The first is that Leonard Howell was very intentional in thinking about how to establish Rastafari. And then secondly, recently there have been people particularly going around on the internet and elsewhere trying to ascribe origins of Rastafari to India and saying that the African contribution was minimal. And that also will be part of what we're going to be addressing. But before we get into all that, I want to give a little background, a little context as to the kind of things that were going on in the world at the time when Leonard Howell was getting ready to come on the scene. So we have World War I happening between 1914 to 1918, which is a worldwide event. And as we know, in World War I, subjects of the colonies, such as in Ghana, Jamaica, Nigeria, Cameroon, Trinidad, Tobago, were all fighting on behalf of their colonial masters. That was to have a great impact on the movement for emancipation later on, and we're going to talk about that as well. Another event that is of great importance is the opening of the Panama Canal. So the Panama Canal is a canal that was constructed to have ships be able to easily connect around the Americas, as opposed to going all the way down to South America to be able to get onto the other side. Very similar to how the Suez Canal was constructed in Egypt to allow passage of transportation. Another important event that was occurring around 1916 was the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was an Islamic empire that stretched from a greater part of Europe, and it broke up in 1916. So there was a lot of things going on. And then in 1922, we have the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia that brings about the establishment of the Soviet Union. And then on the other side of the world, we look at women's issues. We see women getting a lot of traction in terms of being able to vote in the United States and also worldwide between 1917 and 1922. Now, right after the First World War, we also see the establishment of the League of Nations, which is an organization that was designed to bring the nations of the world together, of which also would have a direct connection to Rastafari later down the line. And we're going to talk about that as well. Another big event that occurred a little bit later was the Great Depression. So the Great Depression, starting in 1929, was a situation where the stock market crashed in the Western world. It resulted in people really getting into hard times, people having to queue just to buy a loaf of bread. I think those of us who were young during the early revolution days in Ghana, we can really relate to that kind of situation where we had to queue. So these things were going on. Now, in terms of the Black world specifically, and in terms of the early conceptualization of Rastafari, we see Marcus Garvey leave Jamaica and come to the United States in 1916 at the invitation of Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington was a pioneer educator here in the United States. Now, in 1917, in Africa, in Ethiopia specifically, we also see the crowning of Rastafari as Ras, or what some people would translate as Crown Prince, but is really more Ras. And right after that, in 1924, he takes a tour of European countries. And then in 1919, W.E.B. Du Bois organizes the Pan-Africanist Congress, which was also a major event, and followed by the crowning also of Haile Selassie in 1928 as Negus, or king. Now, all these things taking place in the world. Another critical event was in Ghana. We had J.E. Casely Hayford putting together the National Congress of British West Africa, which was to organize for agitation for independence, also occurring in 1917. Now, all these events are important because they are informing how Black people are going to be moving forward. These events are one side of the coin. The other thing that was really happening was something that was steeped in a movement known as Ethiopianism. So let's take that into context, because Ethiopianism is going to really shape many things down the line. Now, you may ask the question, what was Ethiopianism? Well, what is Ethiopianism? So Ethiopianism is simply a religious and political movement which really began because Blacks in churches, both in Africa and also in the United States and the Caribbean, felt like because of the racism, they weren't getting an opportunity to be able to move up the ladder in the religious circles and also in the political circles. And it resulted in some kind of frustration and discontent. Now, Ethiopianism has been, burgeoning here and there since the 1700s, but it really took off, as we're going to see, in the 1800s. And one of the things that really helped Ethiopianism to really bloom was the Battle of Adwa, 1896, which was, as we already know, decisively won by Emperor Menelik of Ethiopia. So Ethiopianism concerns itself with patriotism for Africans, unity of Africans, concern for other people, etc., etc. Now, Ethiopianism, as I mentioned earlier on, got a major boost in the 1880s from South Africa. South Africa, all of a sudden, saw itself with a lot of Black mission workers advancing the cause of Ethiopianism. So we have churches such as the Tembu Tribal Church, and also the man who actually coined the term was Mokone, Bishop Mokone, who coined the term Ethiopianism from South Africa in 1892. So colonized subjects who had been subjected to Christianity were looking for something that was more authentic, that was more connected and practical to their African beliefs and practices. So Ethiopianism was not limited to the Western world or to South Africa. We see that in Nigeria, we have the first Ethiopian church, the Native Baptist Church, established in 1888. And then we have Cameroon, 1897. Ghana, 1898. We have Zimbabwe, 1906. And then we also have the Church of Christ in Africa, also in Zimbabwe, which was an Ethiopianist church, also established. Now, prior to all this, in 1865, in Jamaica, there were Ethiopianist churches also burgeoning. And this is going to inform a lot of things that we're going to be talking about momentarily. According to the researcher, Professor Robert Hill, they had been in existence, and I quote here from his book, Red History, prior to the coronation event in Ethiopia in 1930, a considerable tradition of Ethiopianism. Now, interestingly, the first Native Baptist church in Jamaica was established by a reverend known as George Lyle, who left the United States from the state of Georgia and established a church in Jamaica in 1783, known as the Ethiopian Baptist Church. So we see that Ethiopianist ideas were going back a far time. But what will be more direct in the shaping of Rastafari ideology and conception has to do with the books that were being published by these Ethiopianist-oriented preachers. One of them is a book known as A Black Man Will Be the Universal King by Reverend James Morris Webb from here in Chicago, who published this book around 1919. And he was also a reverend who spoke a lot to the United Negro Improvement Association, UNI. And we've heard a lot of times the whole quotes look to Africa for the crown of the Black King, which was actually stated by Marcus Garvey. It was first stated by Reverend James Morris Webb, an Ethiopianist preacher, who is also what we would know as a Rastafari. And then the other book that was also instrumental was the Royal Parchment Scrolls of Black Supremacy by Reverend Petersburg. And then thirdly, the Holy Pity, of which I have a copy somewhere here, by Atlee Rogers, also published in 1924. And then after that, we're going to have in 1935, Leonard Howell publishing his Promise Key. One interesting fact about the Promise Key is that it was actually published out of Accra, Ghana. So, it is an early manifestation of having this Ethiopianist tradition also in Ghana. And as we shall see, the countries with the strongest Ethiopian traditions were all vying for a place to fight alongside Ethiopia when Ethiopia was attacked by Mussolini in 1935, 1936. Now, these Ethiopianist preachers, particularly in the United States, were advancing certain ideas. For instance, advanced the idea all Black people in the United States needed to give up their American citizenship to take up Ethiopian nationality, because they were not people from the United States, they were African people. And then we have the United Negro Improvement Association under Marcus Garvey, and we see the Reverend Rabbi Ford also writing the what we now know today as the Ethiopian anthem that we sing during our meetings. Ethiopia, the land of our fathers, the land where God loved to be. Okay, so he wrote that the original version of that for the UNIA, also in the Ethiopian tradition, and then it was later on adopted by the Ethiopian World Federation and then the Rastafari family at large. I'm moving a little fast because there's a lot of things I want to cover, and I know Raskofi says that there is a limitation with time, so I'm trying to push on. So, having set the tone for the background of the things that were occurring in the world, and particularly in the Black world, we want to ask ourselves, who was Leonard Howell? Leonard Howell, as I said earlier on, is known as the first Rasta. And as I said, I'm going to answer this question. Was he actually the first Rasta? And my answer is going to be yes, but my answer is also going to be no. Now, he was born in Jamaica in the parish of Clarendon. So just as Ghana is divided into regions, in Jamaica there are parishes. So the parish of Clarendon is where Leonard Howell was born, in a village known as Maypro. He was in a family of 10, and he was the eldest of all the 10 children. Now, it is said that as a young man, a big judge in Jamaica had asked him to testify against a man who resided in his community. And Leonard Howell refused to testify because the man had been accused of murder. And Leonard Howell was being asked to come to the court and testify against the man. But he refused to testify. So after the court case, he was advised that if he could find somewhere to, as we say in Ghana, balance too, right, then he should do that. So he left Jamaica at a young age and went to Panama. And as I said earlier on, construction for the Panama Canal and all those things were going on. So a lot of people moved from Jamaica to aid in the construction of the canal. But for Howell, he joined the U.S. Army, right? And he worked in Panama for a little while, and then, joined the U.S. Army from there and arrived in New York City in 1918. He worked for years for the U.S. Army till like around 1923 when he was discharged from the Army. After being discharged from the Army, he set up shop in New York, where he established what was known as the tea room. So a tea room was a place where you could go and have a sip of tea, but also it was a place where you could go for different kinds of herbs. Like if you were having any kind of malady, you could go for herbs. So he was selling herbs of, Caribbean origin, herbs of American origin, all of these in the tea room in New York City. During this time, he joined the UNIA. He became very good friends with Marcus Garvey. He actually rose up the ladder in the UNIA. And he also became very good friends with a person who was very instrumental in the independence struggle for Ghana. Now, when I was a young man, I never knew that this person was not even a Ghanaian because of how well entrenched this person is in the struggle for Ghana's independence. And this person was actually originally born in Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm referring to George Padmore, the most honorable. And as I grew up into my teenage years, there's a library, and I'm glad to know that it's still in existence, the George Padmore Library in Accra, that had wonderful selection of black books. I used to go there and just sit down there with my little church money and just devour the books. So George Padmore and Leonard Howell became good friends around this time. Now, this is going to be important down the line. So, Marcus Garvey was deported from the United States in 1927 for Jamaica after having established the UNI here in the United States. Now, Leonard Howell was to face a similar kind of event a few years down the line in 1932 when he was also deported from the United States to Jamaica. So we can see that here the U.S. government was trying to basically send the people who they considered to be higher up ranks in the UNI but not of United States origin back to their countries. When Leonard Howell arrived in Jamaica in 1932, the Jamaican government had put a ban, a prohibition on revivalism. So revivalism is simply a movement that, was very strong. It still is in Jamaica, but it was very strong in the 1920s. And it basically was, I'll call it a syncretic movement. That is a movement that was taking Christianity and African practices and beliefs and merging them together, as we have in Vodou in Haiti. And revivalism came out of the native Baptist churches that we talked about earlier on. As for the native Baptist churches, they were more African than Baptist, right? And they didn't even have any missionaries going to areas such as St. Thomas, in Jamaica, which we're going to talk about down the line until very much later. So when Leonard Howell came to Jamaica, he started his activities first in Kingston. He was to be arrested 2 years after his arrival in Jamaica and sentenced to 2 years in prison. Now, when he came to Jamaica, as I mentioned earlier on, he established the Ethiopian Salvation Society. He started preaching in Kingston. And at that time, Marcus Garvey was also preaching in Kingston. And Marcus Garvey had successfully been able to purchase a place called Idlewild Park and renamed that place Redemption Ground. And that was a park where most of his preaching went on. So Leonard Howell also began preaching in Kingston, but for reasons, he later on moved to St. Thomas. And I particularly am of the conviction that Leonard Howell did not simply choose any parish to go to. He was very intentional about selecting St. Thomas as the parish he was going to go to, and we will talk more about why that is. But after his establishment in St. Thomas Parish, he would move to the adjoining parish, which is St. Catherine. But let's hear from Leonard Howell himself. He gave an interview to the Jamaica Gleaner in November 1940, or November 23rd to be specific. And this is what he said. He said, after my travels and subsequent return to the United States, I became attracted to the Rastafarites and afterwards returned home. to Jamaica to preach its tenets. So 2 questions that we want to ask ourselves here. Number 1, who were the Rastafari that he was referring to if he was the first Rasta? And then what were the tenets of the Rastafarites? So as I mentioned earlier on, all these Rastafari were Reverend James Morris, Webb, Reverend Petersburg, and Lee Rogers, Grover Redding, etc. And all the tenets that the Rastafari were projecting included the acceptance of an Ethiopian identity, the rejection of white supremacy, the idea that Black people should recognize a universal Black king, as we see advanced in the teachings of James Morris Webb. The Rastafarites also asked Black people to pledge allegiance to the government of Rastafari. Rastafarites advocated for a physical return to Africa and, more importantly, for organization among Black people for this to occur. The Rastafarites used Ethiopian flags at their parades and their marches. And also, another tenet was that as a Rastafari, you were supposed to be prepared to die for the freedom of Ethiopia. Now, these were the tenets that Leonard Howell was referring to, that he was introduced to by the Rastafari, that he came back home to Jamaica to preach. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, Leonard Howell began preaching in Kingston, Jamaica. But after a while, he left Kingston for the parish of St. Thomas. Here, he would be greatly welcomed. Not that he wasn't welcome in Kingston, he was, but his preaching was very much embraced in the parish of St. Thomas. But at the same time, the colonial authorities were not happy with him, and they were sending police people anytime he preached to go and record every word that he said. And he was very much aware of that. But he was also intentional. For instance, he called King George a vagabond. Being under the colonial system and being raised by your parades to be consistently referring to the King of England as a vagabond. Now, he sold the pictures of His Majesty, Rastafari, to his followers. And so initially when the colonial government were looking for something to pin him on, to arrest him, they came up with this whole thing that he was selling pictures to Jamaicans and telling them that once they got a picture, that would serve as their passport for them to go to Ethiopia. But apart from the truth, as he said earlier on, he was advancing the tenets of the Rastafarites, and one of those tenets was the use of the picture of Rastafari. So that was one of the ways that he was generating funds for his organizations. Now, it is also important for us to look at why the parish of St. Thomas in Jamaica was very conducive to the early blossoming of Leonard Howell and by extension, Rastafari's activities. Even to this day in Jamaica, and the whole Jamaica is African, but St. Thomas is really like a stronghold of African retention, even to this day. And this is so because even after the abolition of slavery in Jamaica, the slave master decided to move slavery to a different phase. And this phase was the phase of indentured servitude. So in other words, we're bringing in workers from other places in the world. So they brought people from China, they brought people in from India, but they also brought in people from what we call today the Congo region, right? And this includes countries such as Angola, Republic of Congo, and Democratic Republic of Congo. and all these places around the Congo River. This continued for a very long time, well into the 1840s. And because of that, these new entrants into Jamaica were coming in with a strong infusion of Congo practices, Congo ideology, Congo ways of thinking, which remains to this day, right? We look at Jamaica, for instance, St. Thomas, stronghold of Kumina to this day, right? Kumina is drumming and dancing, also originating from the Congo region. And so in the colonial times, the practices that were originating from this Congo region were all classified under the banner of Mayalism. So Mayalism was the original, which was later on transfused into revivalism. And then revivalism, as we're going to see later on, also involved directly Rastafari ideas and practices. So St. Thomas really welcomed Leonard Howell. He began to preach in St. Thomas. He was having crowds every time he was preaching. He became very well established there. And he would later move on to the adjoining parish of St. Catherine, where he would establish a Rastafari commune known as Pinnacle. Howell was married to a lady known as Tinette Howell. It is important to elevate the name of Tinette Howell because she played a very critical role in the establishment of Pinnacle. Now, what am I referring to? So Leonard Howell, after putting together his savings and having donations from people who wanted to see the establishment of Pinnacle and his followers, went to his wife and said, we want to buy this piece of land. We have such and such. We need a little bit more. And Tinette Howell actually was the one who sold her jewelry and put the money towards the establishment of Pinnacle. Now, the followers of Leonard Howell say that the land was about 1,500 acres, even though the government of Jamaica is trying to claim that it was more around 300 acres. But I think that the consensus is that it was at least a 500-acre piece of land, which is now under contention because they're trying to claim that Leonard Howell didn't have the papers, even though there are counter arguments to that he actually did have the papers, that the papers are identified, but the government of Jamaica has somehow found a way to sell majority of the land that belonged to Leonard Howell to a real estate developer in St. Catherine. So Leonard Howell, I don't know exactly the number of children that he had, but I know at least 3 of them having met them. So when Leonard Howell left the parish of St. Thomas, he purchased this land in the adjoining state or the adjoining parish, which is St. Catherine, and established Pinnacle as a commune. Now, a lot of activities were going on at Pinnacle. Mind you, at the same time, Leonard Howell was running the Ethiopian Salvation Society. And all the things that were going on at Pinnacle, the activities included farming, right? They were greatly into farming and also ganja farming, right? But agricultural and, ganja farming. They were also known for pounding rocks because, where the Pinnacle is situated is a rocky place. So they were pounding rocks into gravel, which also was a way of generating income. They made clothing, right? They made clothing for themselves and also for the society at large. They were known for building houses. They established a school on the grounds of Pinnacle. And together with the Ethiopian Salvation Society, established by Leonard Howell, they also had a bakery on site at Pinnacle, but also had 11 other bakeries in town, in Kingston and all around Jamaica, which were generating income for Pinnacle. So pinnacle was not just a commune where Rasta people were just, just sitting down there and blazing chalice all day long. It was an incubator of entrepreneurship, Rastafari, at a very early stage, but a hub, I would say, that spread on ecological consciousness, because they were also promoting that idea, and also African pride, but most importantly, political action. Now, I want us to now, having set the tone, listen to a little bit of history about Leonard, the context in which he arose. I want us to be more specific and look at his message. What message did Leonard Howell deliver, and to who was he delivering this message to? It is important for me to point out that when Leonard Howell came to Utah, the trade union were appealing mostly to the working class people. Like they were looking at the working class people. Nobody was appealing to the peasant, the farmer. And so Leonard Howell was very intentional about directing his energy to the portion of the society which had been rejected, the peasants. And that's who made up the majority of the peasantry, were also the African people. So Leonard Howell's message was that the time has come for Black people to, quote unquote, change the God. And I'm going to hear use some quotation.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Bosco, can you please mute your phone? Bosco, please.
He says, and I quote, Ethiopia is the succeeding kingdom of the Anglo-Saxon kingdom. Our philosopher is the Anglo-Saxon kingdom's philosopher's successor, a wide-awake universal mastermind. Then Howell also says that upon the crown of His Majesty are many diadems. Now, he interpreted this specifically to align with the idea that we always espouse in Rastafari, that upon the coronation of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I the First, 72 different nations bowed to him. Now, that Howell was saying that, look, upon the crown of His Majesty are many diadems. He was also saying that now that His Majesty has been crowned, any king in the world is subject to the crown of His Majesty, because he's the one who has the many diadems on his crown. So, then Howell also was strategic about preaching. What he did was he would put side-by-side photographs of the third son of King George. Now, it is important, this third son of King George was the one who was sent by King George of England to go and represent him in Ethiopia at a coronation of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I. So, Leonard Howell puts a picture of this third son of King George alongside a picture of His Majesty Rastafari, and show it to the people and say, who would you rather follow? You want to follow this weakling who is the third son of King George, or would you rather follow the King of Kings, Emperor Rastafari of Ethiopia? So Howell was basically signaling to the Black world that the white world's time was coming to an end, and that the time had come for the Black world to rise. And if we look in the Promise Key, again, I'm going to use a quotation from chapter 1 of the Promise Key that Howell used in making this point. He says, the Duke, that is the third son of King George, who was sent to represent King George at the coronation of His Majesty. And I quote, the Duke fell down, bending knees before His Majesty Rastafari, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and spoke in a loud voice and said, Master, Master, my father has sent me to represent him, sir. He's unable to come. And he said that he will serve you to the end, Master. So, Leonard Howell used this quotation to show that even the person that you are worshiping as the colonial master is serving this King of Kings in Ethiopia. So why don't you? And this King of Kings in Ethiopia is your king, black people. So why don't you let go this King George of England and embrace your king, the King of Ethiopia? Now, it did not end there. So if anybody is trying to like put across the idea like maybe that Leonard Howell was basically advancing some kind of idea on the religious plane, that is only partly the case. Leonard Howell was also advancing a very political idea. In fact, he said, if anybody had any kind of grievance, that grievance should not be reported to King George of England or any of his representatives. They should write a letter to His Majesty Rastafari, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And not only that, Leonard Howell also worked on the psychology of Black Jamaicans. And what do I mean by this? He said, I know our mothers used to tell us this. Like, so for instance, in Ghana, when Ghana was under colonial rule, the anthem was God Save the King or God Save the Queen, right? So Leonard Howell basically told Black Jamaicans, he said, you know what? Continue to sing the anthem, God Save the King. But as you sing that anthem, do not imagine that you're singing it to King George of England. You are singing that anthem to King Rastafari of Ethiopia. So again, he was creating a psychological shift out of the colonial mentality into a more emancipated mindset for Black Jamaicans. And another important thing that Leonard Howell did was that he told Black Jamaicans to stop paying taxes to the colonial government. So this was one important point in his platform. Do not send no money to England. Let us use the money for the benefit of Black people. Now, another thing that Leonard Howell did was also to look at the gifts that were sent by King George of England to Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia during the coronation. And here I'm going to use the quotation from Leonard Howell himself. He looked at the gifts and made a case. He says, the Duke handed to His Majesty Rastafari, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, a scepter of solid gold, 27 inches long, of which had been taken from the hands of Ethiopia some 1,000 years ago. This magnificent piece of workmanship, which had inscribed on one side, Ethiopia shall make her hands reach unto God, and on the other side, King of Kings of Ethiopia. Now, why was this important for Leonard Howell to emphasize? He was saying that, look, even the King of England, King George, has sent this scepter back to its original owner, the King of Ethiopia, to signal that Ethiopia, the Black people of the world at this time, are stretching forth their hands unto God. And that indeed, their king, King Rastafari, King Haile Selassie, is the Black king of the entire world. And he also made the point again that even the colonial king, King George, is bowing to King Haile Selassie. So what are you waiting for, Black people? It is the Black man's time. Now, as you can imagine, these ideas did not sit well with the colonial government in Jamaica. They began to plot as to how they were going to destabilize the activities of Leonard Howell. Now, they raided Pinnacle 3 times. I'm going to talk about that momentarily. But before that, remember we talked about Leonard Howell after the establishment of the Ethiopian Salvation Society, being arrested and sentenced to 2 years imprisonment after he was released. Now, during his trial, he's also noted as the first person in Jamaica to declare His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie I, as the returned Messiah to the earth. And this occurred in the Moran Bay courthouse in the parish of St. Thomas in Jamaica. The first one. Now,
turn off your camera.
Say it again. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought somebody was saying something. At this point, as I mentioned earlier on, Leonard Howell was intentional about selecting the parish of St. Thomas as the crucible of his early activities. One second. I better take a seat. And that was very intentional because he was going to create an idea which was to embrace the African practices that were in Jamaican society. So according to the research of Professor Robert Hill, this, in its early stage, Rastafari possessed a close and organic link with the belief and ritual systems of Jamaican folk religion. Now here, when they say Jamaican folk religion, they're basically saying African religion. So why is this important? As I mentioned earlier on, the continuous supply of indentured servants from the Angola-Congo region to the parish of St. Thomas, which is on the eastern side of Jamaica, made it so that these practices were always fresh in the minds of the people. So how did we these belief systems and these African practices? The first is the embrace of Kumina. So in Pinnacle, the drumming and dancing that took place were directly Kumina. Kumina is the dancing and practices of the Congo Angola people who were very present in the parish of St. Thomas. Now, Kumina also had a feature which allowed the Africans who were practitioners to go into trance. So this was also occurring in Pinnacle. Something else was that when Howell established the Ethiopian Salvation Society, there had been prior to that a Jamaican preacher, native Baptist preacher, an Ethiopianist preacher known as Alexander Bedworth, who had passed on, and his followers all moved to join Leonard Howell in his early formation. It is also important to know that elements of Congo religion in Jamaica, particularly the Kumina people, began to all the way their own churches, separate from what Leonard Howell was advancing for Rastafari. And they refer to His Majesty Haile Selassie as Nzambi in Congo, which is the name for the divine in Bakongo religion. Apart from Kumina, we had what was referred to as the Poko churches, the Pokomania churches, who also began after the coronation, some of them declaring Haile Selassie as God after the coronation. And then we see the idea of always Howell referring to the black god and black goddess, the black king and black queen, the Alpha, King Alpha and Omega, right? Now, having established Pinnacle and having advanced these ideas, there are also some African ideas that were to become central to the early conception of Rastafari. And the first one I would like to talk about is the centrality of Africa to Rastafari thought. This was something that was established in Pinnacle by Leonard Howell and his early followers. Now remember, Jamaica was populated by people from all parts of Africa. But the major groups of people that populated Jamaica were the Congo. And when we say Congo, we're referring to people, again, from Angola, Congo region, the area of the Congo River. the Akan people, the Yoruba people who are referred to as Nago, still in Jamaica, the Fon and Ewe people of Ghana, Togo, those polities were not in existence back then, but in that region. And then also the Ibibio and also the Igbo peoples of Nigeria. This determination is made based on ship records that the slave masters left behind, but also words that are present in Jamaican language that come from these groups of people that are still in use today. So for instance, in Jamaican language, and also in a lot of proverbs, there's a lot of proverbs from all these groups of people still in use in Jamaica. But when we hear a word such as patu in Jamaica, which is the owl, right? Referring to the same name is used by Akan people in Ghana, patu as owl. When we hear bisi in Jamaica as the kola nut, right? We can determine is coming down from bisi, as we say in Ghana, which is also the kola nut. So the idea of Africa as central to Rastafari ideology is advanced by Leonard Howell Pinnacle. Now, the second idea that I want to put forward is the idea of divine kingship. So this idea of divine kingship is a very much African idea coming to us from ancient Kemet, coming to us from ancient Nubia, coming to us from even contemporary African societies. We have this idea of divine kingship. And Leonard Howell continued to project this idea, projecting His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie as the divine king. Another idea that was alien to the colonial doctrine and orientation is the human as a divine person. There's an idea also that was a continuity that was advanced by Leonard Howell. The human is a divine person. We are part of the Creator, so we cannot be, as they say in some religions, that we are born in sin. We are not born in no sin. We are divine spark from the beginning. And if we cast our minds back to ancient Kemet and look at the Hosea says that we come on earth as humans to perfect our character. So we don't come here to be born in sin and to live in sin, but to come here as divine, also along the way perfect our character. Now, at Pinnacle, Leonard Howell also and his followers also advanced the idea of the use of herbs in healing, right? So Pinnacle was also what they call in Jamaican folklore a balm yard, where people go for divination and also people go for healing. Now, Leonard Howell also advanced the idea of communalism, living together. And we still see these elements in certain aspects of Rastafari, right? And in fact, when he was interviewed one time, he said he was establishing Pinnacle so that he would be able to, quote unquote, live a socialistic life. In other words, he was looking forward to a liberty which brought the Black people, he and his followers together, and which generated income for the benefit of all. And it's important for me to point out, and maybe I'll point this out later on. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the continuity that Rastafari has in terms of practices related to menstruation. So these practices were also actualized in Pinnacle. And these were also continuities that were coming from the African continent. Even to this day, for instance, when we take the Akan people, for instance, when a woman is at that time of the month, they say that she has gone behind the house or caught a picture, which means that in very ancient times, there was seclusion where the woman actually went and lived in a secluded house during that time, because the idea, which is still very much alive today, is that the menstrual blood is very powerful. In fact, it is, to my knowledge, used even in making certain powerful medicine. And it is so powerful that at that time, the woman was asked to seclude herself because she could not cook for her husband. She could not even in the marketplace pass over certain people's wares and all this kind of stuff, or touch objects that are ritual objects, or even fetch water from the stream. So the whole idea of Rastafari having certain practices regarding menstruation was also a very much African idea that was, continued in Pinnacle by Leonard Howell. And again, even as I was talking about this the whole day, because of this, if you look at the gap in older times, the married man and the married woman were not necessarily staying in the same house, right? Because there was this belief that the menstrual blood was so powerful that if it came near the war medicines, it will render the war medicine in their own house, and then the men stayed also in their own house, and they will go over and visit the women in these houses. Now, another very important point, which unfortunately I've heard is being ascribed to the Indians, which could be not further from the truth, is the idea of the ritualized smoking of herb. Now, let me state here categorically that, yes, the Indians use herb, ganja, marijuana, whatever you call it, but they only ingested it orally. That is, they only drank it or ate it. It was the people from the Congo region who smoked the herb. And this is why, even though the herb is known as Indian hemp, it is also known as Congo tobacco. They were the first to smoke the herb in pipes. And this can be confirmed by the research of Kwadwo, by the research of Maureen Warner Lewis, by the research of Shula Bilby, etc. The people around the Congo region were the first to use pipes to smoke herb. And not only that, they were also the ones who would block a prayer, so to speak, before smoking the herb. So this is also a continuity that Leonard Howell maintained in his early formation of Rastafari ideology. Now, we can also see Congo names for herb in Jamaican language today. So names such as Diamba is a word of Congolese origin. A word such as Makonje, which is a name for ganja, is of Congolese origin. A word such as Maka, Congolese origin. A word such as Kaya, Congolese origin. Okay, so we should not try to minimize Africa's contribution to the formation of Rastafari. Rastafari is an African thing. And Leonard Howell was very intentional about this in the early days. Now, let's talk about Lux. Majority of the people at Pinnacle were not Lux men or Lux women. But it is pointed out that the security at Pinnacle were always Lux men. The people who guarded Pinnacle were always people who were Lux. Now, why is this important? This is also important because these days we hear people going around talking about Rastafari learned how to wear Lux from India. How is that possible? Now, Rastafari, black people everywhere at any point in time in our history, there have always been Lux in our midst. We have, from ancient Kemet, we have rulers who were fully in their luck. As we, even to this day, we look at a society like the Yoruba in Nigeria, we have the whole concept of Dada, which are children who are born and whose hair is not cut, right? We can look at even among Akan societies what we call Bijinaba, which is a child who is born whose hair is not cut and the locks are maintained. There are different priests and priestesses, traditional priests and priestesses who were locked in all African society. So what are the chances that you would be looking at a very boring society which had very tiny populations on the island of Jamaica to replicate a practice, as opposed to looking at a population which was majority in Jamaica and which were very intentional about in terms of establishing and continuing their practices, right? So Lux also becomes a part of Rastafari identity, and this was also a continuity that was advanced by Leonard Howell. So when we look at the 6 dimensions of African nation building, we realize that Leonard Howell implemented every single one of these dimensions. Now, the first dimension of nation building is the production of food, agriculture. It is said that the people at Pinnacle produced so much food that they not only were feeding themselves, but they were also supplying the markets in Sligo and surrounding areas of St. Catherine. The second dimension of nation building is the establishment of a health system. By his establishment of barnyard and using herbs for healing, Leonard Howell also advanced this idea. The third is defense and security. The whole idea where Rastafari, anytime we have any gatherings, we always want to make sure there's security at the gate or people at the gate. That is an idea that is also coming from Pinnacle, right? Where we have people represent security. So this is an aspect of African nation building, also advanced at Pinnacle, the importance of defense to our nation. Of course, as we learned earlier on, the people at Pinnacle were also house builders, building houses, providing houses. And I wish we were on a platform that we could actually see some pictures of Pinnacle. If you see the pictures of Pinnacle, and the architecture is exactly the construction of an African village that was put forward over there. And as we learned earlier on, the other dimensions of African nation building are clothing. The people of Pinnacle were known for not only designing and making clothes, but also working leather, making shoes and leather product, belts, all these kind of things, and selling them to the public, which is another dimension of African nation building. And finally, education. As we learned earlier on, Leonard Howell and his followers established a school at Pinnacle. And so by looking at these, we see that Leonard Howell established and met all the dimensions of African nation building. Now, Roscoe, how am I doing on time? All right,
We're still listening to Dr. Kwadwo Oppong Wadie speaking on the topic, Leonard Percival Howard and his articulation of Rastafari as an African fundamental framework. Let's go back to Dr. Kwadwo Oppong Wadie.
That maybe Leonard Howard was some kind of more leader who was confined to some marginal sections of Jamaican society. That is far from the truth. I'm going to begin here with a quote from D.A. Dunkley, his research. Howell participated in renewing the optimism of Black Jamaicans with his promise of liberation from oppressive British colonialism and white supremacy. As I mentioned earlier on, when Howell came back to Jamaica, nobody was preaching or even concerned about the peasants. He was the one who reached out to the peasants. Bustamante and Manley were appealing to the working class people. And they were trade unionists. So the working class was their main audience. But Howell was the one who appealed directly to the peasantry. Now, later on, we'll see that Bustamante will also prove to be the one who had the greatest aggression and opposition to Leonard Howell. He would be the one who ordered Jamaican constabulary to raid Pinnacle and set it on fire in 1954, after having tried unsuccessfully in 1941, where they raided Pinnacle and came under the guise that Leonard Howell was shielding somebody who was wanted. But, they came, they scattered the people out of Pinnacle, people came right back. So 1954, they went, they burnt the whole place down. Most of the people left, but some came right back. And then they went again in 1958 to move the vestiges of those who remained. So Howell was not a leader who was confined just to one section of Jamaican society. He was very much visible on the political front in Jamaica. And he offered the people an alternative to the Creole nationalism that was being advanced by Bustamante and also by Norman Manley. He said, you people are not Creoles, you are Africans. You need to look to Africa. This is what we need. Howell told the Black Jamaicans not to trust the trade unions. And he was of the concept, the idea that Jamaica should not follow the pattern that would create a national identity for the country upon its independence, which unfortunately independence was achieved under Bustamante, and therefore the identity of Jamaica became more of a Creole national identity as opposed to the African identity that Leonard Howell proposed and espoused. Now, because of this, Howell was greatly persecuted. In fact, Ras Miguel Lord, who is a very prominent attorney, Rastafari attorney in Jamaica, think that to date, Leonard Howell remains the most persecuted and persecuted Rastafari. And I would submit to that, because Leonard Howell was arrested more than 50 times, even when he was in his 70s. The colonial government and even the new government that assumed independence, of course, working for the colonial master, hadn't forgiven him for even being bold enough to, ask Africans to look to Africa in Jamaica. Even when Leonard Howell left the community and went to live in a cave, they still came there to come and arrest him, and always, putting all these frivolous charges against him. But Leonard Howell was unstoppable. And because of his unstoppable nature, even after the dispersal of Pinnacle, where most of the people in Pinnacle moved into other parts of Jamaica and into Kingston, into areas such as Bakawal, from which a lot of the formations that we know as Rastafari organizations today would begin to spring up. Talking about, Bobo Shanti, EWF, and all these other organizations. Those were vestiges of Howell's population, Howell's followers. And therefore, his unstoppable nature is directly responsible for Rastafari going beyond the boundaries of Jamaica and even into the worldwide Black, world. Now, it is important that Leonard Howell, in addition to being a man of action, a political leader, also was a citizen to lead Black people. It is often said that if you want to lead Black people, you need to have some kind of around you. So yes, Leonard Howell, and that's why he adopted the mystic name that he used in publishing the Promise Key Guru Maharaj, which his followers added another gun. You know, Africans will always like to emphasize certain things to make the thing more potent. So the name evolved from Guru Maharaj to Guru Maharaj, right? And he used that name as his mystical name. But one thing that also was very appealing to the followers of Leonard Howell about him was that he was not just talking and doing these things. He was directly using his organization to improve the lives of the members of his organization. So when he formed the Ethiopian Salvation Society, he was making sure that all the members who were contributing their little money, who were running the bakeries, who were running the bars, who were pounding the rocks into gravel, their lives were directly improved as a result of these economic activities. He was very intentional about that. And I think that's something that all of us should emulate. And talking about emulation, some things that we can learn from Leonard Howell. Number one is his perseverance. He never gave up, even to the very last day. He stood. And when we hear Bob Marley being referred to as the tough gun, that is actually paying tribute to the original gun, Leonard Guru Maharaj Howell. Now, Howell also upheld the liberty and the practices of Africa, which is something that we need to also learn from him. He always advanced the notion of unity, even when it was very difficult for him. Even when, for instance, he and Marcus Garvey had certain disagreement, he never publicly came out and chastised Marcus Garvey for those disagreements. You know, because when Howell first came back to the United States, he and Marcus Garvey would meet and have lunch on a weekly basis. But when he started pushing the Rastafari ideology, there was a little bit of tension between him and Garvey, who felt that, you know, Jamaicans who were dealing with things such as Pocomania and Kumina, where, you know, that was not a civilized way, as he would put it. It was more like doing a black version of Orthodox Christianity, and Howell wasn't having any of that. But in all that, he did not come out and say, you know what, I'm disbanding the ideas of Marcus Garvey. To the contrary, he actually projected and promoted, alongside Marcus Garvey, these ideas of Black empowerment and Black advancement. So it is important that we embrace the cultural values of Africa and also the practices within Rastafari liberty. Now, I want to end by reading a quotation from Leonard Howell. And this is from a poster. And again, this was printed and posted all around Jamaica. Now, in those colonial days, HMS or OHMS simply stood for On His Majesty's Service, which was referring to His Majesty, the King of England. But Leonard Howell took that and changed that to mean On His Majesty's Service, the King of Ethiopia. So, Leonard Howell says, On His Majesty's Service, King of Kings and Lord of Lords of Ethiopia, Black people, arise and shine, for the light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. Let all generations of Ethiopia hear the voice of Leonard B. Howell, for in his hands the Lord is given. Let not the preachers of Babylon persuade you to turn your back against the Lord God of Ethiopia. Woe be unto the people of a race who seek not their own foundation. Your wives shall be servants for the wives of other men, and their daughters shall be wolves of poor men. Shall be wives of poor men and of vagabonds. And there shall be tears because of privation. I strongly appeal to you to speak and learn of your own foundation. Woe be unto a race of people who forsake their own doctrine for another. They shall be slaves to the people thereof. O people of Ethiopia, boast not of the progress of the white man, believing that you are a part of the project. You will be cast over the bridge of death, both body and soul. Generation of Ethiopia, I, Leonard P. Howell, speak unto you. For as the Lord God of Ethiopia liveth, this is a very serious affair and must not be forsaken. The white men gave the black men the wrong doctrine. They told them to condemn silver and gold and seek heaven after death. But now, we the black men have found out their trick. We found that the writers of the story was a clique. All their intention was to make themselves strong. Under the white man's doctrine, the black man slides the things in life, seeketh heaven after death. It has brought us starvation to starve, live in disgrace, and die in dishonor. They that refuse the Ethiopian doctrine now shall find no other, but slavery and oppression shall overcome them. So for these words, I give thanks, and I'm willing to take questions if there is time. Thanks. Rastafari.
All right, so we all heard Dr. Kwadwo Oppong Wadie on that in that address. Well, right now he's taking questions, and I personally want to ask him questions as well. So let's cross over back to Accra, Ghana. He's actually speaking to us from Chicago, but the event is being hosted by the Rastafari Council of Ghana from Accra. We're going to cross over back to the event. Dr. Kwadwo Oppong Wadie.
My Lord, we applaud Prof. Weero for his presentation. It's in fact insightful, informative, and very educative. Some of the misconceptions we held, some of the misinformation we have, this presentation has corrected most of that misinformation we held. And a part of his presentation also confirms an aspect that was earlier espoused by Ras 7 side in his last presentation. That is about Rastafari emerging from the Rastafarites emerging first from the US before being promulgated in Jamaica. I think many of us have also heard a lot. And at this juncture, we'll open the floor for comments, suggestions, and questions. But I want to commend the speaker for his presentation and for that much wisdom he has shared. My Lord, we appreciate you. So please, any questions?
Yes, sir. Greetings. Kongara. Kongara. Yes, I salute one and all Rastafari Isis, you know.
True.
Yeah, man. Well, I soak up the whole vibes from beginning to end, and I can just say, you know, heavyweight doctoral presentation, you know. Yes, lovely vibes, you know. You don't know. Empire Saturday will never come. Lovely vibes, you know. Yeah, man. Teachings of Rastafari. Teachings, you know. Lifelong learning. Give thanks for the vibrations.
Give thanks, same way I am.
Aight.
All right, I'll go next.
I think your sister has her hand up.
Oh, okay, all right. I'll go after the sister.
Yeah, I thought I was muted from. I thought it was controlled from you. But okay. So I have a question. Yeah. That's Weero.
Yes, I am.
Great presentation. I have a question. And the question, can you throw some light on the origin of reggae music from Jamaica as to the rhythms and what drums relating it to Africa? The origin.
Awesome question. So, reggae, as we know it, is directly connected to what we have come to know as Nyabingi drumming, which is also directly connected to Buru drumming and also Kumina drumming, which I mentioned about earlier on. So when we hear what we call the heartbeat and these kind of drums, they are directly connected. But it is also important to know that in the Nyabingi orchestra, there are 3 drums, right? We have the funde drum, we have the kete drum, and we have the bass drum. Now, the kete drum, the name is a direct, I would say, continuity as well, because in the Akan drum set, we also have the kete orchestra, which is made up of 6 different drums, of which one of them is directly the same as what we do in Jamaica as the kete drum. So reggae music is directly connected to these drumming patterns of Kumina and also Buru drumming.
All right.
The questions.
All right. So I will go next. All right. I will go next. Give thanks, Emperor. Very insightful. Give thanks. Very insightful, very informative, and straight to the point, factual. So I have more than the questions I'm going to ask, but I'll add, for the sake of time, I'll just ask the ones that I have. And before I do that, I also want to confirm the point you made about the king, the divine kingship, right? Because right here in Ghana, we have the Otumfo, who is referred to by his people as Onyamikesie, Otumfo Nyamikesie, right? So that is confirmation of that concept among I as Africans. It's always been there. But the questions I have for you, Weero, Dr. Oppong Wadie, is first of all, was Percival, was he political? Did he try to form a political party, for instance? Because I'm trying to put some reasoning behind why he was so persecuted, especially by Bustamante, later on and all of that. Was he trying to maybe form a political movement? And then while we are at that, if you could also add this for me, the food culture of Rastafari, as we have come to know it, did it start from Percival Howell? What connection is there with Barnyard and all of that? Give thanks.
Two great questions. Give thanks, Empire. I also want to give thanks to Empire earlier on, who is broadcasting this presentation on the Radio Culture Network. So give thanks, Empire, for that. But 2 great questions. The first one, no, Leonard Howell did not establish a political party, but he had great following among the Jamaican population, right? So even though he was not directly involved in political party formation, his ideas were informing the behaviors of Jamaicans as is related to their political activities. So that is, in my estimation, one of the main reasons why he was persecuted. But he was also persecuted. Remember, this is a population which has been under colonialism. And one thing that colonialism does to your mind is that it pushes you into self-hate, right? So anything that reminded the people of Africa, people like Bustamante and Manley, were totally against, because they hated themselves. They didn't represent the black people. They were Syrians. They did not look like black people. Leonard Howell was a full-fledged African black Congo. And, the black people could identify with him. So they saw him as a great threat. And, he was also telling you, you know what? I'm burning down King George, and you, Bustamante, you're just a little... I told the people not to pay taxes to King George. So, who are you? So this made him a huge threat for the trade unionists such as Norman Mali, also Bustamante. Your second question, yes, the food waste that we know as Rastafari today was also enshrined in Pinnacle. Now, this includes ITAL food, particularly food that is cooked without salt. Now, this is also a continuity coming from the African people. Remember, even to this day, food that is cooked for the ancestors, they don't use salt in making that because the ancestors are believed not to partake in anything salty. So the idea of salt abstinence was a direct continuity from Africa that was advanced by Howell in Pinnacle. But as we have today, we have Rastas who are Italians and those who are not. That also existed in Pinnacle. Not everybody there was an Italist. There were people who, enjoyed other things.
Give thanks.
Yeah, give thanks.
Enough thanks. Give enough thanks.
My lord, you can come in with the next question. Why don't we just raise it?
Greetings.
Greetings.
Yes, I.
Insightful reasoning.
Give time.
I want to touch on the African religion aspect of Gunguru Maharaj. How would you say within Rastafari today, African religion stands?
True. Give thanks for the question, Pastor. I think that that's a question that is an evolving one. But there are two aspects. For instance, if we look at certain Rastafari organizations, the way they lay their table, put certain fruits on their table, the whole idea of having His Majesty's pictures and all those are all aspects of different aspects of African religion. And here I'm using Africa in the wider sense, not only limited to the continental Africa, but also to the diaspora. Now, in terms of bringing it to the fore today, I think that we need to look beyond ritual practices as what defines African spirituality and look more at what are the ideologies that drive African ways of knowing, African ontologies, African spiritualities, African ways of knowing. And one thing we're going to also see right off the bat is that it is dependent on nature. African spirituality is related to a deep observation of nature. When we look at Rastafari even today, a lot of us still have a good, close affinity to nature and to herbs and to using herbs for healing and all these kind of things. So these aspects are strong. The centrality of Africa to Rastafari is another aspect. As I mentioned in the presentation, looking at other practices such as menstrual taboos, all these things are things that, in one phase or in one way or another, try and embrace. Now, as to the depth to which this embrace is, it is relative. Some embrace it more than others, and depending on the kind of organization one belongs to, or the patient, if that person does not belong to any organization per se. So, give thanks, Professor.
Rastafari, give thanks. And greetings to everybody on the call. Bless. I see some faces there.
Mr. President, my lord, the Virgin, you wanted to ask a question, the one with the curtains behind you, the window curtains behind you. Please come in. We barely know some of our allies, so if you come in, please, you can introduce yourself. I'm Kofi.
That is Bongo. It's Bongo. Harold Bongo. He's got a cat team behind him.
Yeah, man. Rasbo, please come through with your question. Happy to see you. Sorry, people. Hello? Yes, Raz, we can hear you. All right.
Yeah.
So my question, my question was talking about Rastafari with food sustenance, self-sufficiency. How did Howard influence Kwame Nkrumah in attaining such ideology for Ghana, especially based on Rastafari tenets? And the second thing is, why did Marcus Garvey not support Howard in his African assertions in his movement? Because they were fighting for the same cause, yeah? And one becomes, I don't know if Marcus Garvey had that tenant to say, I am more educated than, I don't know, but I don't know, I want to see the connection between Marcus Garvey and Howard at the time that influenced the Pan-African world.
If thanks. Let me start with your first question. So in terms of how Howard directly influenced Kwame Nkrumah, I do not know. What I do know is that Marcus Garvey directly influenced Kwame Nkrumah. And Kwame Nkrumah actually says this. He says, of all the books that he has read, the one that influenced him the most was the philosophy and opinion of Marcus Garvey. So, and also, let's forget that the Black Star that is in our Ghana flag is a direct tribute to Marcus Garvey's Black Star line. So, yes, Marcus Garvey directly, Leonard Howell, not so sure. Now, I want us to...
His book was published in Ghana.
Say that again?
His book was published in Ghana.
Yes, his book was published in Ghana, but that will be some research that we'll have to do. I don't know if it was Kwame Nkrumah had anything to do with the publishing of Leonard Howell's book, the Promised Key, but it was definitely published in Ghana in the 1930s. I want to say 1935, right? So that is an earlier time, and Kwame Nkrumah activities were not so prominent at that time on the landscape. But in terms of your second question, yes, there was, okay, let me put it this way. We don't want to dwell too much on the differences between Marcus Garvey and Leonard Howell, because as he pointed out, they were working towards the same cause. And we, as children of both Marcus Garvey and Leonard Howell, are also working towards the same cause. However, Marcus Garvey, had a feeling that he expressed, and sometimes he used certain words to describe certain African practices which were not so palatable. And I think that he felt that Leonard Howell had embraced a population in Jamaica which was seen as kind of backward, so to speak, right? And he didn't want to associate himself with that. But in terms of the message, right, of Black pride, repatriation, reparation, look to Africa. So even we have to look at Marcus Garvey's speech, where he says, talks about if the white man has seen his God through his own spectacle, and if the Chinese man has seen his God through his own spectacle, it is time for Africans to also look and seek their God through their own spectacles. I'm paraphrasing here. We need to look at that speech carefully and look at what time he made that speech. Was he being influenced by Howell after his initial critique of Leonard Howell? So we don't want to look at it as, a kind of battle between what? The works of Marcus Garvey stand strong through I&I. The works of Leonard Howell stand strong through I&I. And all of these, as you said, we're working for the same cause that I&I is working for. So I give thanks for that question as well.
All right. Thanks. And One last question is, with the healing, yeah? Howard was a healer. Did he get his knowledge on herbs from the Africans, or he brought this from the Panama Canal in America?
So Howell directly got his healing knowledge from the Africans in Jamaica, even before leaving to Panama and before migrating to the United States. That's when a time came for him to establish a shop in the United States, the first thing he thought about was what he was skilled in. That is healing people with herbs, and that's what he did.
Bless that, Lord. Give thanks.
Give thanks. Yes, I.
Yeah. Zil. Yes, I. Blessed. Yeah, you give thanks for wonderful exposition. My name is Malcolm, and I want to know was one preceding the other. If you look at Matimo Plano and Howell, and also second, the position of Howell on the hair culture of Rastafari. Was Howell locks? And what was his position on the hair culture of Rastafari? And thirdly and finally, the parallels of Howell in, let's say, Africa. Could we relate that to the Mau Mau and Dedan Kimati? These are my questions.
All right. Give thanks, Jamalco, for the questions. I believe your first question asks whether Howell was a locksman. Am I correct?
No, the first one was Matimo Plano and Howell contemporaries, or one preceded the other?
No, Howell preceded Matimo Plano in the initial stages. You know, Howell lived till he was 82 years old. So he died in 1981, only a few months before Bob Marley passed on, right? So Howell's initial work was at a much earlier stage than Mortimer Plano, who was more active in the 60s and also in the 70s. Howell's time period stretched from the 1930s all the way to when he passed in 1981, right? And then your second question, no, Leonard Howell was not a lock, and many of the Howellites were not locks people. It is said, though, that the security at Pinnacle were always locks people. But apart from the security, most people at Pinnacle were not locks people. And then the third question, you mentioned something about contemporary times, right?
Whether there are any parallels in Africa, if it can be related to Dedan Kimati and the Mau Mau.
So it is said that the Rastafari population that embraced locks was greatly increased with Dedan Kimati and the Mau Mau on the stage fighting for the liberation of Kenya. Remember that, you know, Leonard Howell and the early Rastafari preachers were preaching an ideology of Black liberation, which we're still doing today, right? But when people in Jamaica saw Dedan Kimati, people like General China, and the Mau Mau warriors, all in the Rastafari who wanted to wear locks and also embrace a Black Africa-oriented ideology.
I'm sorry to come back in here because I know there's a lot of people who want to ask questions, but this is just to piggyback off what Jamalcolm just asked. What was the reasoning behind having locksmen as the guard? Do you know if there was any? What was the idea? Why did they have locksmen at the gate?
That would be something that, you know, will need to be researched. I'm not 100% as to what the reasoning behind that was. But in the literature, in the readings regarding Pinnacle, that's something that comes up, that the people who got it, who were at the security, were always people who were locks. But as to the reason behind it, I do not know.
I want to quickly chime in here too, Ras Weero, because it's in connection with Ras Malcolm's question. So how did the Jamaicans get to know the Mau Mau warriors? Because at that time, the media was not as prominent as it is now. So how do you think the connection came about?
Very good question. So remember, in those days, there was no, TV was just coming around. TV actually came around in the last. For those of us in the so-called developing countries, it became a thing in like the 1960s. But what was really around during those times were newspapers, right? And newspapers were really cherished. And some of these newspapers, some of them coming from England, some coming from Kenya, and there were like organizations in Jamaica which were actually subscribing to newspapers from Africa. And these newspapers having these images in them. This is how these people were getting exposed to issues related to the Mau Mau, seeing pictures of the Mau Mau in places such as in Jamaica. It was mostly the newspapers.
Can I come in? Hello. Greetings, my lord. Hello. Let me relax. My name is
Ogboni Weero
I.
Yes, sir.
Yes, my lord. My question is, where did Jah come into the whole equation of Rastafari, where people start to call Jah Rastafari, things like that? The highest last year is Ethiopia, Rastafari, simple.
Well, you know, one thing I mentioned earlier on, give thanks for the question, Willa, was that, you know, Howell, having been inspired by the Rastafarites, they believe in looking at the Bible as a book that can be reinterpreted for Black liberation purposes. So this Jah Rastafari also is something that, you know, came from Pinnacle, you know, under Howell, the whole call and response, Jah and, you know, Rastafari as the response. Even though there are some people who are trying to, again, ascribe that to India, but as we all know, when it comes to call and response, the whole world, everyone know that call and response comes from Africa. So, you know, Jah Rastafari is also coming from African people in Jamaica, from Pinnacle, and then dispersing through the other Rastafari organizations, UWF, Bobo Shanti, and 12 tribes and other organizations that came later on down the line.
Yeah, that's proof right there. Call and response.
Right.
There you go. Just an example.
Yes, sir, my lord. So I also want to ask a question. You said Howell was addressing the issue of heaven on earth. He approached it like he was exposing the people to the European trick. So could you tell some of the things he was saying to, you know, dispel the notion of heaven after death? And presently, if you look at Rastafari, are we on that same mission? Are we dispelling the notion of heaven after death? And what do you think are some of the teachings that would help, like present-day Rastafari, advance that Howell conversation of exposing the trick of heaven after death? I give thanks, my lord.
True, give thanks for the question. So, yes, Roscoe. So Howell absolutely was advancing that idea. Now, he was saying that, look, the people who are telling you that you should wait to die, and then when you go to heaven, you enjoy. Look at their lifestyle here. They have everything. They are enjoying right here on earth, and they are using you to get what they want. So why don't you do for your own self? So the whole idea of self-empowerment. And that's why he established all these Pinnacle and all these big businesses, all these bakeries around Jamaica. As I pointed out earlier on, he made sure that all these were directly impacting the lives of his followers. So the followers who came in with nothing, at the end of the day, were self-sufficient. They had what they needed. Their economic conditions had improved. So Howell was practical in that sense. He was saying that, look, let's forget about waiting to die. Nobody has ever died before and gone to heaven and come back and tell us how it was over there. Let's do our own thing here. Let's establish it under our own king and our own principles, Rastafari. I think there was a second part to your question. You asked what? So in today's terms, right? We as Rastafari, today can learn from that. And I think that's something that we also need to point out to our brothers who are still under the colonial sway and who, quote unquote, being made to be satisfied with the idea of waiting to die to go somewhere and then enjoy, right? It is time that we as Africans look to ways that we can establish our quote unquote kingdom right here on earth and not be tricked, as Howell said, into thinking that, you suffer here on earth and then once you die and go to heaven, you enjoy. Yes, Sister Sadia.
Okay. Pastor Weero, this is my last question and comment, then I'll exit. I am also wondering, what are we doing today as Rastafarians to advance our cause? To the notion of heaven and earth also, but also to encourage, our youth in Africa and to build Africa so that, it will be a heaven for us to leave Babylon and come and enjoy Zion, and stuff like that. So this question is, what are we doing? And as Daddy Bosco is on the platform and Ryder in the motherland too, this is a question that I'm asking. I don't know what activities are going on there right now for me to, I'm not in link with Rastafari right now because of where I'm located. But I've seen on social media the Bastard boys in Accra, and the work they are doing is so beautiful and exemplary. And I think this should have been a cause of Rastafari, So what are we Rastas doing to establish our mark? I know that the Church tribes, we used to do these things. It was on a smaller scale, but these Bastard boys are doing it on a larger scale, and we can support them. Or what else are we doing?
Great question, Sister Sadia. I think that, I don't think we are not doing anything, but I think that there is more that needs to be done. We all fall short of that. I think we all will do more in that regard. Maybe it will not come through as what the Bastard boys are doing, but with organization, remember, as Marcy said, we have to organize and centralize. So with organization, and organization doesn't necessarily mean that belonging to an organization, but working towards the same cause. So as you said, if there are some activities, maybe this could be a catalyst for us to look at some of the things that we can engage in propelling this idea of creating a heaven and earth on earth for I&I people and for African people at large. Give thanks.
Daddy Bosco, do you have something to contribute as to what are the works going on down there that we can support or we can be aware of?
Yeah, hello. I think for me, what I think we should institute from Howard into our lives is food self-sufficiency. And I think Rastafari movement with Daddy Bosco, we have something like that going on. Kofi Asante can tell you, because I feel food and creativity should be fused together like Howard did in Pinnacle. And I think there's something going on. So Kofi Asante can tell you, we're trying to establish something. I believe in farming because that's the way Rasta can feed himself first. Food, clothes, and shelter. So I think we're doing something, but we need some energy, We need some energy like Weero giving us tonight to take the energy from Howard and say, let's do something more, Yeah. So Kofi Asante, if you hear me, you can tell the people what we're doing, Yeah.
Yes, but I'll give some information. I think Daddy Bosco's network he's having issues with his network. So maybe when he comes up, he can add a little.
We have started what we call the Rastafari Farmers Cooperative. When the whole notion of the ability to farm, acquire license to farm and all that came in, we thought as a group the best way we can appeal to these government bodies or whoever is concerned is to be organized or to approach them as an organized body. So we proposed the idea of a Rastafari Farmers Cooperative. So here we are mobilizing funds to advance farming. The intent is to acquire a piece of land and commence some farming activities that will generate income. So we intend to employ all the aspects of farming, that is production, manufacturing and sales. If possible, connect to our brothers at home and abroad as our market. And so we have commenced, or we have made available shares at 200 cedis each. So to be a member of the cooperative, an individual is expected to purchase a share at 200 cedis each. As many shares as one can purchase for now is commendable. We have ones with 5 shares, others with 6 shares. And so the registration is 50 cedis each. And like I mentioned earlier, the notion is to position the Rastafari community in such a way that when it's necessary to acquire a license, we can approach the government or whoever as an organized body, as a farmers cooperative, so that we can also participate in whatever the country or what opportunity the country or the ministry has for farmers. One of the reasons is also to, like I mentioned, position the Rastafari farmers to assess benefits that the government has. Mostly there are fertilizer, manure, but according to our farming practices, most of I we preach organic farming. And so how do we advance the need for organic fertilizers, organic as an organized body? How do we make inputs regarding farming? How do we, all these is why we have put together the Rastafari Farmers Cooperative. So we have about 10 shareholders. The minimum requirement to register a cooperative is to have 10 shareholders. We have that now, and we are engaged with the national cooperative body to register the farmers cooperative. So as many people as possible who purchase shares, that will enable us to generate enough income to, one, acquire land and commence on farming activities. So please, in brief, this is what the Rastafari Farmers Cooperative is about. And this is one of the...
If we are abroad.
Empress, your question again, please.
How can we purchase shares? How can we be part of it? We're not there.
Yes, please. Some of our members, like Rasbungo, who just spoke, is also abroad, but he sent it through a representative in Ghana here. If Momo Services or Western Union or any other means of sending money is possible, we can receive money on behalf of yourself and or the cooperative, and then make available some shares for you. So I think if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. And I have to ask you, thank you. It was a great program, Weero. Give thanks.
All right, give thanks. I have one more quick question. If nobody else has a question, because I don't want to be the one asking too many questions when others have, But anyway, if there's time, can I also ask Weero quickly? So Rastafari, right? And a lot of people would get their introduction to Rastafari through biblical antecedents, through biblical connections and all of that. Now we are experiencing a world where Christianity itself, or the Bible as a base source, is suffering, in terms of even people, how many people are going to church these days and all of that. The Bible itself and Christianity is suffering. So now, having Rastafari, which kind of, and I'm not saying this is the case, but to many people seem to have its initial antecedents with biblical references. How are we dealing with that? How is Rastafari dealing with that? And what's your reaction generally to this concept, if I'm making sense?
Great question. I think that it is important, Empire, to have our minds back. The colonial period in which people like Leonard Howell took the stage, right? The people were steeped in this kind of biblical idea, but he did not limit his ideas to the Bible. He used, when necessary, the Bible to make a case. But at the same time, the whole point he was making was, we are Ethiopian, we have our own king, we have our own liberty, we have our own practices, let us embrace that, right? So with that, the Bible can be taken out of that context. Now, I'm not here to step on anybody's toes and tell them not to believe what they want to believe in. But I think that's a great question. I mean, in today's world, right, there's a lot of knowledge, and that is hurting the use of the Bible, right? But it also depends on why you're using the Bible. Are you just embracing the Bible for embrace sake, or are you using it as a tool to liberate your people? So if it is as a tool for liberation, then some people do need that, right? But there are some people too who are above that. And I think that, those who are not so inclined and have other reasons where they can justify, being a Rasta without a Bible, why not, right? Even Leonard Howell, he wrote the Promised Key, right? Because if the Bible was sufficient for him, he wouldn't have written the Promised Key. The Promised Key was to emphasize,
very
what the task at hand is, which is liberation of all African Ethiopians at home and abroad, right? And I think we should be of the same mindset today. I think that after the dispersal from Pinnacle and Bakawa and the establishment of Rastafari organizations, some of them emphasize the Bible a lot. Some of them emphasize the Bible, but emphasize the Bible as a tool for liberation, right? And those ones, I mean, there are some people who need to come through the Bible because the Bible is so steeped under our colonial system. But the expectation is that if you come through that initially, you'll also be able to learn more and graduate from there and see that, African liberty has been in existence from the very first time that humans appeared on this earth. And therefore, we need to continue in that manner. So to answer your question, summarize, I would say, Rastafari in this time needs to look beyond just the Bible. If you are using the Bible, you must use it in terms of as a tool to liberate yourself. But then there's also a problem there because there may be some things in there that necessarily do not always work towards Black liberation, right? So for instance, if they say that it's only a rich man, it is hard for a rich man to go to heaven, just like it is hard for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. This one that Howell would call a trick, right? Why are you telling us this when you are taking our resources and building your societies? So we need to critically look at these things. Well, I think that at this point in time, Rastafari need, as Bob Marley said, Rasta don't believe, Rasta know. It wasn't even him who said that. He was just repeating what Rasta has been saying. But we need to be more inclined towards knowledge and never believe behind.
Enough thanks.
And give thanks for the question. Excellent question. Yeah.
Hello, Fikome. And then Precious, we have advanced the 2 hours. I think Ras 7 side is coming right
Quickly.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
And Prof, thank you so much. Weero, thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
There'll be something where you to emphasize what I think say go help us a lot when we keep it in mind. This thing about how, as you say, you keep on going back to say it wasn't just this and that, but it was political. You talk about Black liberation, African liberation, like as you say, what that means be very important for us if we put all of these things in that context. Another one to the point about the Congo presence in Jamaica after they end the slavery thing. Abolish it on paper in 1807. How between 1841 and 1868 they sent a lot of people from the Congo and other parts of Africa. Of course, I love the way you give us a detailed picture of that. But I'm going to think about how seriously we could take that too. It's like when you had to talk to a man and say Congo, right? And all this, it's not just words. It's us. It's real people. And in Jamaica right now, there's a strong presence of the Congolese culture where they feed into the thing where we live as Rastafari. And then one last one, Nyabingi. Well, I know so you could talk about Nyabingi in a few weeks, right? I would love to hear you where you go take that one. But as far as the Pinnacle presence, the Pinnacle members, the time the thing that they do for Pinnacle in terms of groundations, their sessions, their worshiping sessions, their praise sessions, their rituals that they perform over there. The drumming was a serious thing, like you tell us, right? That time, there's a lot of Rastafari people who were averse to the idea of drumming. They thought it was backward. But these brothers did not stop and say, Rasta people don't do this, so we're not going to do it, right? So they went in there and they were playing the drums when it came to the initial Nyabingi sessions. And they kept on doing it, right? But against a lot of resistance from some of the brethren. They thought it was not clean. They thought it was backward. They thought it was, whatever. But the Pinnacle people were playing the drums. And now when we think of Nyabingi, some people think about the drumming first, And to the point about Matimoplana and Count Ossie, who's better known for as one of the main figures in bringing about Nyabingi. Definitely, these people were vibing off of what's happening after the Pinnacle scene. So the importance of Leonard Howell be something where we've pronounced a lot. Because I was talking to someone, he was wondering where this fit into the African question. So give thanks for elaborating on these things, taking your time to get into it. I know there's much more you go fit say about these things, but maybe another time when you come through, if you elaborate on some of these things and extend some of these reasonings some more. Give thanks.
Yes, I give enough thanks for those words. Very, very, very straight and to the point. So thanks for that.
Give thanks.
Yeah, one love, Weero I. Thanks for the presentation and a very nice presentation. For me, it's not really a question, but it's a call to all of us in terms of leadership. Is it right for a Rasta to be part of leadership in maybe the various countries we come from, whether it's Congo, Nigeria, or whatever? Because if you check, the struggle is a little bit difficult. And we are not doing anything to help Russia. So I think for me, I would say it's important to push most of us into some of these leadership roles so that we can empower our youth and all that to keep up this leadership role, so that at least we can push our movement forward in terms of empowerment and stuff. I don't know whether I'm making sense, but I feel I don't know if it's right for a Rasta to be part of this government, like maybe into politics and all that, because I feel that is where you can that is the only way we can push some of these things forward.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. I think that both positions hold true. That two things can be true at the same time, right? I mean, I think that Rastafari, as we know it, burn politics and all these things, right? But at the same time, we can be strategic, right? I think we've been having these discussions, some of Adrian and I. We can be strategic, and as you said, push people to certain positions and have them, also work on behalf of I, because, like I said, we need to empower the African youth. And how are we going to do that, right? And that could be a strategy. But the danger is that we should not think that is the end game. That's the end in all, right? If you get it, then you can become some big politician, and then, that's the end of it, right? It is a matter of using it as a tool. We have to use all available tools to us, to push our agenda forward. So absolutely, I give thanks for those words. All right. Yes, Raskofi, I think like we said our time. Yeah, man.
Yes, sir. So there was one chipping last day. You for come every time God teaches more, like you used to do those times, So I will appeal, yeah, man. So from ownership,
that's a great point. But I think this is also, all of us get something to say, and I will say, we all should also look at times and topics that like you're talking about the agricultural thing. All of us can learn from that. So, I think this should be a great opportunity for all of us to also, look at what we know about and come in and so that we all can learn from it.
Each one teach each one. So blessed love. I mean, more teachers. Yeah, man. Blessed love and keep doing the great works. Yeah.
Rastafari.
Thank you for good days in terms of ownership. Still continue. We still,
Yes, sir.
Blessed love. Yeah.
Much love. Yes.
Yeah, man. Bless.
We give thanks to Prof for his thought-provoking presentation. Our next presentation will be in 2 weeks' time, the 18th of August, 2024, and the presenter will be Ras Christian Noche, aka 7 Fireside, and you present on the topic repatriation before and after Marcus Garvey. So we do appreciate the presenter. We appreciate I and I all who have taken time to be present in this reasoning. I think there are many of you who would like to add one or two, but we have already exhausted the 2 hours slated for this conversation. So if there is nothing much to add, we'd like to bring the curtains down here. But is there anybody who thinks there's any last thing you would like to chip on? If not, does the presenter has any final words you'd like to put across? And then we can call it a night. My Lord, Prof. Weero, please have any final words.
Well, yes, Raskofi, so give thanks once again for putting the series together. Give thanks to Ras 7 Fireside. Give thanks to all of them. I think that, like His Imperial Majesty said, knowledge stops only at the grave and even goes even beyond that. So, we should all try to learn from each other as we progress. And one way of doing that is organizing these sessions. So I give thanks for the time. And I give thanks to everybody who was able to take time out of their day and be here. So, give thanks.
Yes,
Shout out to Rastafari for broadcasting as well.
Radio Culture, we appreciate. We hope subsequent lectures will also receive the same, broadcast. And on that note, we give thanks, my lords and empresses. We appreciate your time. Like I mentioned, this is Garvey month, and the next presentation will highlight Marcus Garvey and his repatriation agenda. So we invite you all. Please, we'd like to invite you all to help us in sharing the invitation for the meeting. When the flyer and the invite comes, we will appreciate that you all share your links and also invite the next meeting. My Lord Prof. Weero will also ask if it's possible you can share a written if you have a written form for your presentation. I would like to present it. I would like to publish it on the website and share the link for others who couldn't attend this reasoning to also benefit from the presentation. I want to ask Prof if possible. My Lord, please, will it be possible to get a written form of your presentation so that we show on the website for others?
Yes, I would. You hear me?
Please come again.
I said I'll work on it.
In the meantime, yes, the audio format will be available because we were recording it in the studio. We were recording it in the studio, so we can make the audio format available in the shortest possible time. Thanks.
And we also have a video recording session which will be posted on the YouTube channel of the Rastafari Council. That will be available.
But I know we want to give thanks most times like the entire Rastafari. Give thanks for your presence with us.
Watching the game, Chande, headless one, no monarchy was your intellect, and stiffest girls' intelligence.
Yes, indeed, yes, indeed. Oh, did you feel that? Yes, indeed, that was the lecture by Dr. Kwadwo Oppong Wadie. Dr. Kwadwo Oppong Wadie, known to most of us as Weero I, Rastafari, Weero I. Dr. Kwadwo Oppong Wadie speaking on the topic, Leonard, Percival, Howell, and his articulation of Rastafari as an African framework. And this formed part of the bi-series lectures organized by the Rastafari Council, Ghana. In 2 weeks' time, there will be another session, and I understand the speaker will be 7. Fireside. This has been yours truly, sitting in for myself. Radio Culture, yes indeed. I want to end this session, but please, let's reconvene in about an hour or so where we touch base with Papa Wastik and Black Prophet with On Tour. On Tour, we'll be speaking with these two artists who are currently touring and check the state of their tours. Let's reconvene in about an hour for On Tour. One love every time. My name is Kwesi, a son Bako. Jah beloved.